Hello, I am Brad Johnson, and I'm from Kit Carson, Colorado. I'm studying farm and ranch management here at CSU in the hopes of one day returning to the family operation. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to the moderator of our final panel session, Innovation for a Resilient World. Jasmine Dillon is an assistant professor of beef and dairy agroecosystems in the College of Agricultural Sciences here at CSU. As a professor, Jasmine works to help animal science students develop systems thinking skills and holistic perspectives on the agricultural systems they will be working with. Her research interests include livestock production systems, sustainability assessment, integrated crop livestock systems, regenerative agriculture, and food and ag policy. Please welcome Ms. Dillon.
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Good. You enjoying the conversations? All right. This is our last panel, and so I'm hoping that you'll be able to synthesize some of the things you've heard in the earlier panels as we get pretty interactive here. So I'm going to ask you to do something, but first I'd like to ask that the panelists come up and take their seats. And while they do that, to facilitate the interaction we will be having, I really want to encourage you to consolidate yourselves to these tables closer to the front of the room and to try to sit with someone who either you haven't met before or who may have a little bit of a different perspective on some of the challenges that we've been talking about than what you have. So could you take a couple of quick minutes and maybe shuffle yourselves a little bit? Don't be afraid. What do you say, James? Yeah, you're right. That was a request. That was an order. Yes, please consolidate. Yes, brave souls in the front. I see introductions happening. Good. All right. You getting settled in? Great. I see all these shaking hands. Yes. That means you're sitting with some people you may not know, right? All right. Awesome. Cool. We have got an excellent panel here of people from across the value chain with different perspectives on what innovation for a resilient world looks like. And so I'm going to give them a brief introduction, and then they're going to tell us a little bit more about their background, about where they've come from, how they've come to be where they are, and what their organization thinks about resilience and sustainability. So first, I'd like to introduce Sarah Bohnenkamp, who is a sustainability and leadership communication consultant and coach. Sarah works with clients around the world, specializing in cultivating powerful leadership and business brands and sustainable leadership and communication systems. She loves working with passionate leaders, entrepreneurs, and global businesses who aren't afraid to touch uncomfortable truths so they can solve the most epic problems of our time. Sitting next to Sarah is Candice Laing, who is Vice President of Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations at Nutrien. Candice Laing is Vice President, Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations, VP of those, at Nutrien, the world's largest provider of crop inputs, services, and solutions. Her career has spanned both private and public sector organizations, with a focus on strategic business initiatives that create long-term value and high-performance cultures. She is passionate about sustainable agriculture and ensuring the world is well-fed. She is proud to have grown up in Saskatchewan, where she currently lives and where her family farms. Finally, sitting next to Candace is Martha Montoya. She is founder and CEO of Ag Tools, an award-winning web software as a service solution, allowing farmers and everyone on the food supply chain to make better decisions, increase profits, avoid waste, and impact climate change. Martha's career in agriculture started over 25 years ago while sourcing berries from the Americas to New Zealand, Australia, and Thailand, which provided her with an intimate understanding of the product from source to delivery. So with those brief bios, I'd like to turn the mic over to Sarah so she can tell us a little bit more about herself.
Well, I'm so excited to be here today because I just live down the road in Parker, Colorado. And so to have the chance to be here at Colorado State University speaking with people who really care about agriculture, who care about food, and who care about those little hungry babies. Oh, do I have my slide? Is it going to come up? Nutrien, that was a beautiful slide, but I have a little bit of a different one. I'm here because I know that everybody in this room cares just as much as I do about hungry babies. I'm here today because I can't believe that we live in a world where 1 in 6 kids in the US is food insecure, where we throw away over 1/3 of our food. That just baffles my mind. It baffles my mind because we're so technologically advanced. We've got amazing science. We've got brilliant people like you in this room who've got awesome things that we're doing, yet we still have hungry babies. I want to do something to change that. And so I do that in lots of different ways. But I wanted to tell you a couple of things about me. So I'm not from agriculture originally. I was raised in Pocatello, Idaho, where we grow more potatoes than anything else. And we're, yeah, they're, what did he say? He said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We have lots of those fun things. But I always grew up in an apartment. Right? It was all my friends who were the farmers or my friends who owned the cattle. But I was one thing, and that was horse crazy. And I found that if you had horses and your friends have cows, they say, hey, come and help me move those cows because they're a lot of work. And so I had a really cool opportunity to be raised in an apartment, but be a rodeo queen also that loved horses and had friends who were willing to teach me things and to give me the opportunity to get an insight into what their world was like. Because at the end of the day, we all have things in common, right? We want to do things we care about. We want to be surrounded with people that we love. And ultimately, we don't want any hungry babies. And so my career has taken me from Pocatello, where we have lots and lots of amazing people, to Arizona. And in that path, I was working in the credit union world. Like it was money, right? We need money just as much as we need food, right? And I loved that. But I met my husband, and he said, I want to move back to Colorado. And I said, all right, I'll move to Colorado with you. It snows there, but I guess there's lots of sunshine too. And he said, well, you're going to continue to work in the financial world, right? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. But when I found myself here, there were all sorts of little tiny credit unions and little tiny financial institutions that were hiring for employee development people like me. Because that's what I had done with my life. It was about, at that point in my career, it's about training people on how to do service and sales and make loans and count money and do things like that. Right? And when I came here, I thought, well, I'll do that. And when I was 17 years old, living in Pocatello, I had to write a story about what I wanted to do when I grew up, similar to a story that you've probably had to write in your life, right? And there was one thing that I wrote that I was shocked by now looking back. And it said that I don't know what it is, it'll probably be in business. And I had to actually pull out the dictionary to spell business because I'm a terrible speller. I didn't know if it had 1 S or 2 S's. And so I'm writing that out, but then the next thing that I wrote was more important. I said, I don't know what it'll be, it'll probably something to do in business, but whatever it is, it won't be mediocre. And so when I found myself in Colorado, I saw these little baby credit unions, tiny little places that I could go and work, and I just thought, well, that's kind of mediocre. I can't do that. And so I started looking for some other opportunities. And on Craigslist, of all places, I found a job for the American National Cattlewomen. And that's where my journey went from horse lover who knew a little bit about cows and liked to chase them and eat them, to somebody who was hired to run the National Beef Ambassador Program. And it was, again, about employee development, employee meaning the people who wanted to speak on behalf of the beef industry and go and connect with consumers. And my mind exploded. Like, I knew that I loved babies. I didn't want anybody to be hungry. Knew that we needed money to be successful. Knew that I loved the Western way of life. But this was where I was like, holy moly. Opportunity is huge, not to be mediocre. Right? We have so much to do here. And so in that job, my mind expanded. And just a few months later, they said, hey, would you like to be our executive director? And that's where I really got shocked, because I figured somebody like me who grew up, kind of in agriculture world, but living in an apartment that didn't have a degree in anything ag-related, why would I be asked to do this, right? There would be 5 young women that were standing at that door that had degrees, master's degrees, all these things that they'd done to prepare themselves to be in this kind of a role, but they wanted me. And it blew my mind because they wanted something different. They wanted anti-average. They wanted no mediocrity. They wanted to do something different. And so in that, I've seen a lot since then. I've seen cow-calf operations in Pocatello, obviously. I've seen cow-calf operations in Ireland and Australia. I've been to big feed yards in Fort Worth. I've been to stockers, just in many different parts of the world, and it's crazy to me that we all do the same thing, right? We want to feed the hungry people, but we all do it different. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to the humanness, right? The leadership. And so I'm here today to say that I believe that communication is code for leadership. I'm here today to say that I believe that everybody in this room is anti-average, and it's our job to help everybody else be anti-average too. And yeah, let's go innovate.
All right, I'll turn it over to Candace now.
All right, thank you, Jasmine. Well, I want to share just a word about Nutrien, and as we're all going to do, share a little bit about what brought each of us here today, and then a little with you also about Nutrien's perspective on resilience and sustainability. So Nutrien, if you didn't know, because it's a relatively new company, newly merged of January last year, but we are an integrated agricultural company that is both now the world's largest fertilizer company and a leading ag retailer that works with about 500,000 growers across 7 countries. So when we talk about a well-fed world, that's a big deal to us, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But how I got here, as Jasmine said in the introduction, my family farms in Saskatchewan, and I mean my whole family. I think I broke my dad's heart when I left the farm. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I was born in the 70s. And at that time, imagine my dad and uncle standing in a field. So literally one farmer saying to the other, as they're looking at the wheat plants and saying, I don't know, do you think we should try this fertilizer thing? And so, yay for us, they did. But they were getting about 22 bushels an acre at the time. And so they did their test strips and embraced that along with other things. But the next decade, the 80s, when I was a very impressionable youth and not able to stay home, I had to go along for all those rides to check the crops. Maybe a lot of you are familiar with that. And very similar to Krista's story that you heard yesterday, it was absolutely heartbreaking and sad to go along and check the crops in a few of those years, and some of them were consecutive, where there wasn't a crop. The conditions were too dry, or if a little bit came up, pests ate it, and you could watch them turn a field from green to brown day after day. And so I made my decision, unfortunately, that I would leave the farm and head off to business school. I was very, very happy to join Nutrien 7 years ago because I feel my life has come full circle. And in the last 7 years, listening to my family talk about their crops and their harvest year after year, it's really interesting because the tone is one of surprise. They're like, you know, it was like the driest year ever, and we still got 65 bushels an acre on that wheat crop. And so when I think about resilience, that's my story from being really sad in the 80s to a couple decades later going, wow, we can have a great crop in the same or actually worse conditions than when I was a little girl. And it's a big deal to me to be working in agriculture, and I think of the progress we've made, yet we have never been more under the microscope and under pressure from others for what we're doing. And as a farm kid from Saskatchewan, it takes a lot for me to digest that. So I drill into it. It's part of my job to do that for our company and our sector and unpack that a little bit. So, okay, where's the pressure coming from? Very much so. I think we've had a lot of talk about, trust in food, and there's a lot to unpack there. But what I wanted to talk today is more about the intersection and the increasing pressure between agriculture and the environment. And as much as we talk about, you know, SDG number 2, zero hunger and no babies that go hungry, we can't actually talk about that anymore without talking about climate and the environment at the same time. They go together now. And so that's really, for Nutrien, a big part of our sustainability strategy, that agricultural and environmental sustainability challenge, which I'll talk about in a minute. Just a plug, as you can see on our priorities here, diversity and inclusion. We believe from a social perspective that's a top priority for us as well, and I'm really happy to see that such a strong thread through this summit as well. But back to the nexus we have between agriculture and the environment. It is not just civil society that's putting pressure on us or NGOs that care about the planet and the environment. It's really interesting in the last 2 years to watch the interest in investors in this space. Investors are now asking us directly, what is your climate strategy? Have you assessed climate risks on how that will impact your business and your growers? And so it says, the quote at the top, ESG risks. ESG is just what I say investors like to call sustainability now. They think it's something new and cool. And so environmental, social governance risks. And that has been really interesting to watch. And these pressures come together in a way that I think frames a big challenge for us in agriculture. So I feel proud and often defensive of what we've done in my lifetime on the farm. So we have, in fact, spared land based on, and we heard a lot of great things about those practices this morning from Dr. Fraley, but we have spared land probably equivalent to the size of Russia with improved practices on the farm. And I think when we talk about our story and the production intensity, we're looking back. And we know, we also heard yesterday, that we've been in our own echo chamber and haven't gotten outside of our sandbox, so a lot of people don't understand that story. And some of that's on us because we didn't engage in that story, let alone tell it. We didn't engage in that story. So now we have stakeholders that are looking at today and forward. And I think that creates some of the tension we have between what you might call the us's and the them's. So looking forward, if we kept our production like what it is today, and yet look at the demand of food that the world will need. And Shaswati said it yesterday, I don't know if you picked it up, but every carbon sink would be gone by 2050. So at a time when we feel we want to be recognized for what we've done, we actually have to double up our efforts and do basically twice as much going forward. But that's a really hard ask when you feel the world doesn't even understand what you just did, which is pretty amazing. And I think that's one of the challenges for us as we stay resilient and engaged. And if you're attached to the farm, it's a tough ask. How do you, without being understood, double up your efforts going forward? So at Nutrien, what is our piece of that? And I think in the questions Shaswati took yesterday, she really nailed what would be our answer. If there's one thing that is so pertinent to our step forward, it's the digitization of the industry. Because no matter what solution anybody brings to the table in the value chain, if we can't measure and track it, and then reward if there is incentives for growers in that value chain, if there's no data to support that, to feed the systems, protocols, all the rules that will work to do that, we won't get anywhere. So that's what we're really focused on at Nutrien, is with all our growers, bringing them the tools and the technology. They not only need to make plans for sustainable agriculture, but then to track those outcomes. So,
Thank you, Candace.
I come from a completely different world. I am daughter of a coffee farmers in Colombia. So I come from two worlds, Bogota and Medellin. Bogota is the capital of Colombia, and Medellin is the capital of the coffee world of Colombia. So I grew up in two worlds. My parents owned schools and universities in Bogota for the working families, for people who migrated from rural Colombia into the cities because of violence, drug dealing, etc. And then the farming itself, where we were trying to make a living on the farming side of it. So my life went back and forth. And so I come from the world of resilience, talk about resilience. I know that you have a lot of challenges, but believe me, we have much more challenges that you won't believe. Today, for example, I went in Mexico yesterday, which they're starting to live what we're living, the farmers. They have to pay to just have a truck move from point A to point B so they don't get kidnapped or killed. The lands, they have to pay for the land to make sure that they don't come and kill them. So sustainability in our countries is a little bit much different than sustainability in the United States. It's about survival, it's livelihood, it's making sure your family doesn't get killed. And I have even a little story. My father is a chemist, I'm a chemist biology by profession, and he was asked several times to be part of the laboratories for cocaine production in Colombia. And I remember my father telling them specifically, here's the address of my wife, my kids, and you might as well kill us now, because you're going to kill us anyway. And so the resilience that we talk and the sustainability we talk is completely different in different countries. And I would love to have you all invite more overseas farmers so you can start hearing other stories, because at the end of the day, today, all our fruits and vegetables that are eating right now are coming from the southern hemisphere of the world. The lettuce, the tomatoes, everything that you ate today literally is coming from southern hemisphere, which is Mexico down the border, Peru, Chile, and so on and so forth. And if it's in Europe, it's Africa and the southern hemisphere. So it's a different type of resilience and sustainability. But at the end of the day, after traveling over 25 years across the world, developing many crops for many corporations, all the way from the seed, the number one most important crop element in a farm is the farmer. Without a farmer, we don't have anything. And every time that I have heard the sustainability index, I wonder when I have visited the Vietnam farmer or the Indian farmer or the Cape Town farmer, where there's nothing to measure how they survive or how they become part of this society to struggle and to survive. And so eventually we should start measuring it. I think that finally they're starting to talk in the United States about the suicidal rate, which is very important and crucial. We don't talk about the wives behind the gentlemen in the farms, which are so much resilient sometimes than the gentlemen or the farmer ladies. So my path has been that. It has been the coffee farms having to leave the country for obvious reasons of Mr. Pablo Escobar, and landed in a country with my parents investing in the United States and making sure that we would make a living here. And then knowing that I wanted to stay in the farming industry. I just didn't know how. And that's how my life path started. But then also understanding that at some time in life, things were starting to change, and technology was coming on board, was starting to impact us all. And that's when I decided to make like the gentleman from Cargill mentioned today, you have to do a shift fast. And I was like burning the boat of what I was doing before, which was developing crops, shipping to the Walmarts of the world and the Ciscos of the world, and just turn down that and go into technology, because that's the future, and make sure that I would engage now my new generation of kids that are all our engineers are in rural America, from Wenatchee, Yakima, and Salinas, California. All our engineers are in rural America, because I believe, and I know strongly, that kids want to stay at home or in the region, but they don't have the chance. They think they have to move to Silicon Valley or, I don't know, somewhere, Seattle, and they don't. And so we are developing that new crop of computer engineers, aerospace engineers in rural America through universities to make sure that we keep that labor force and the excitement to stay in the industry. So that's kind of my path around. That's it.
Now that you all have heard a little bit about the panelists' backgrounds, we're actually going to turn the discussion to you to begin. So we have 2 questions we'd like to pose to you. And we would like you to discuss those questions at your table and both note any points that you make during your discussion, but also write down questions that come up as a result of the discussion to then pass on to our panelists. Our panelists will walk around and join you at your tables for conversation. And we'll have about 30 minutes to do this before we come back up here to start answering questions. So the first question will be, given everything that we've talked about today and yesterday, the 30 Harvests video, thinking about diversity, the need for diversity in perspectives, in thought, in ethnicity, in gender, and all kinds of things, the need for that in innovation. having talked also about the need to have an innovation mindset and engagement. Think about all of those points that were made by the previous panels and consider the following. First, what is the best approach to achieving sustainable food and agricultural systems? Revolution, evolution, or both? I see some giggles there. I'll say it one more time. What is the best approach to achieving sustainable food and agricultural systems? Revolution, evolution, or both? The second question is, how much of the sustainability challenge is about people versus technology? Again, that's how much of the sustainability challenge is about people versus technology. Everyone got it? All right. Let's begin. All right. Can the panelists please come back up to the stage? How are your discussions? Awesome. I had a few tables say they solved all the world's problems. I'm hoping that we generated a lot of opinions at each table because we want to hear a little bit about what came up during your discussions. So I'm going to walk through the audience with a mic, and I just want to hear what was kind of the most interesting point or the main point that came up as you all were talking. And briefly. Yeah, everyone's avoiding eye contact. I have herding dogs. I can deal with that.
So our table kind of had, we didn't necessarily get as in-depth into the conversations as we'd hoped because we kind of got stuck on how we're defining evolution and revolution. And we'd be kind of interested to hear from the panelists how, like, what your definitions are, because some of us thought of evolution as something that's going on in the past and the revolution is going forward. Some of us saw a difference in speed of revolution is something that's a bit of a quicker timeline, whereas evolution is maybe a slower timeline. And so we were just kind of interested to hear about how people were defining that and how that influenced their discussions on like the food systems and how that's going to change and how those definitions kind of affected your opinions on that.
Thank you. Who wants to take it?
Okay, well, I'll start since both my people to my left and right said, you go. Okay.
You sound smart.
I think the way the questions posed really makes us reflect on, well, I'll back up a step. So I get into debate sometimes with people, and it's a heated discussion. Is the food system broken? Some people really are passionate about the food system's broken, and by extension, the food and ag system is broken. So I think it provokes some thought around, do we need to reinvent ourselves, or do we need to continue to improve and kind of double down on what we're doing? That's how I would frame the question.
I would say that whether it's evolution or revolution, and I heard this, I think last week in Mexico City for an AgroFest, we still have to understand that the government and the entities have responsibility to give us some parameters of behavior so we don't get derailed. And so, and those systems work slowly. I'll give you an example. Literally, I started talking with Mr. Bohnenkamp. Think how long ago was that? About passing more funding into our rural areas. And only this morning, they're discussing finally passing that money of the Community Reinvestment Act from banks into rural area. Because that law was created for urban areas. And now we need more money on the urban and the rural areas. So that $100 billion extra has taken us 15 years. But there was a whole reason for that process. And only in the last couple of years, I've seen the movement faster, but still within the rails. So the innovation of Mr. Joseph, the controller of the currency, is that he drove fast in the last year, understanding that there has been 14 years of everybody trying to analyze that. So there's a revolution that will happen in the next year, 2 years, with that $100 billion down on the ground for all of us, on the farming, on the rural areas. But we have to be careful, because those monies can be just dumped on the country, in the regions, and not be managed properly. And I've seen it in other countries where all these monies, like Puerto Rico is a good example, all this money being sent to Puerto Rico and not properly being managed, not properly being processed, and then guess what? We go back to poverty. So we have to make sure that the systems work, and maybe our legislators have to be a little bit more aggressive, but political science is one important element in our industry that we should be more engaged with, more young people getting political science with our ag background.
And I'll add a Beatles song. Right? You say you want a revolution. To me, that's something that people feel. You know that it's happening. You're a part of that movement, and it's just something that just touches you, right? You say you want a revolution, everybody gets in and is a part of it. Evolution, to me, is a bit of a slower thing, and you might not know that it's happening. Yeah, you're probably in it, but it takes has a different scope and a different timeline that you look back and then you're like, oh yeah, that happened, right? Chickens used to look like this, and now they've evolved, and now they're bigger, right? There was probably some revolution that might cause that, but that evolution is a slower timeline. So, there you go.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just reiterate it then. That revolution is more of a, large scale, maybe a transformation. It might happen quickly. The evolution will be a shorter term, incremental over time kind of change, okay? All right, we've got a question from the table over here.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Michaela. I am a soil crop science student here at Colorado State, and I had the opportunity to sit with these amazing individuals. And we had quite the diversity at our table to answer those really hard questions from very different perspectives. And one of the really interesting parts is we also had a definitions question, because what is the definition of sustainability? And a really interesting way that this question was posed is when producers get asked, is your farm sustainable? What are they asking, and what do producers need to say?
Thank you. Good question.
They need to say yes.
Sounds like this was a common question, so good.
Such a good question. I think that everybody in this room has asked that question at least multiple times in your life, right? What the heck is sustainability? As I tell people, I work with clients like the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. They're like, yeah, don't know what that is. And so we hear people, we hear profit, we hear planet, we hear all different types of things. But at the end of the day, I look at it like this. Don't kill the goose that gives you the golden egg. Right? Whether that goose is, I get profit so I can feed my family, or if it's the water so that I can continue to feed my crops, I don't care. Like, I want to continuously do things so that I can continuously do the things, right? And so, sustainability, the answer, am I sustainable? Yes. But then we need to go into a conversation, right? To say, well, let's be curious and tell me, what do you even think that means? Because, I look at sustainability and I'm thinking goose and golden egg, and you're thinking sustainability and you're thinking I'm killing the planet, right? And so let's get into a dialogue. And so one of the things that I think is really important with definition, my friend Vance Crowe, if you are not following Vance Crowe, do it. He's amazing. He's got a fantastic podcast, but he said something to me that was really powerful. He said, he who controls the definition controls the power, right? And so we've got to be the one that's saying, ooh, I think it's this. What do you think? And hey, let's create a shared one now. But we got to be saying, let's talk about it.
Just real quick, and I always say it's pretty simple. You're sustainable if you are keeping everything in balance, and I think we've talked a lot about systems, and that we have ways to ensure the systems pieces are in balance and that all forms of capital are pulled into that equation. So to me, it's as simple as, we're looking at the economic sustainability of a farm along with the social part, which we don't often talk a lot about, as well as environmental.
For me, sustainability starts from a different angle, which is from the buyers. My conversation always with buyers is every decision that you make will impact a farmer somewhere. So whether it's the wheat, whether it's the strawberry, that sustainability should be or must be not on the farm. I mean, it is in the farm. It happens all the time. But it's on the buyer, which happens to be now a millennium, and that's why I actually did a slide about it, because it has to be with the fact that we have new decision makers in the side of the buying that are young, have not really struggled all the struggles that we all had. There might be the grandparents, so they have skipped one generation, so they really didn't do the day-to-day. And so those, for them, sustainability is the CO2, for example, but they don't understand the human capital on the farming side of it, or the amount of losses, financial losses that the farmers have when they reject that one truck or that one load, or when they didn't buy it because whatever happened. So I think sustainability for me, it's all of what you said, but also on the buyer's side of it, the one who makes the PO, the purchase order.
And one of the common definitions that I come across when we talk about sustainability is a really broad definition that was coined in 1987. It came out of the Brundtland Report. And it said basically sustainability is, it was a definition of sustainable development that said sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it was very broad and wasn't attached to a single label or place. And so whenever I'm talking with folks, I like to also give that as the overall umbrella for this is kind of where we can start talking about sustainability, because most people can get on board with that, right? And then drill down from there. So we've got another question over here.
Okay, hi, I'm Cindy Brown. I'm a faculty member in the soon-to-be called Agricultural Biology Department. Sorry, it has a longer name now, but okay. All right, so our table talked about places where farmers are mostly smallholders. And there's a lot of potential for technology to improve the productivity, sustainability, and resilience of agriculture and food systems in countries or places dominated by small landholders. But how can these objectives of technology be achieved while minimizing the downsides, such as exacerbating inequities and loss of traditional knowledge and culture? And kind of along with this, how can the technology be effectively transferred to smallholder farmers? So maybe, you can draw on some experience and knowledge that you have that as examples or something like that to address this. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's an excellent question, and we had some discussion at our table as well, because just to pile on a little bit, from a policy perspective, especially global discussions around ag policy, we often get stuck because we're trying to bridge two worlds, the developed world and the less developed world, and there are some things and challenges that are extremely different in those realms, yet we're trying to work on the one thing, right? So absolutely. From Nutrien's perspective, our markets are in the developed world. So it's a question even I have, okay, but we're looking at the problems to solve, and there's a lot of opportunity and potential with smallholders and getting them tools and technology. We're not in those markets, so for us, we reach them through partnerships and investments we make, target certain regions and try to move the needle, bringing, extension services and practices and tools to some of those. But I would say it's a very big question, and I'm not actually sure how that will all compute. But it is a big part of addressing, I think, the sustainability challenge globally with agriculture and environmental concerns. Yet I think we find ourselves, stuck in North America in half of that equation, right?
I think that for good or for bad. I'm not here to defend or be against Mr. Trump, but what he's created across the world is, at least in the underdeveloped countries, and I have traveled in the last 12 months, several of them, has created the need to be auto-sufficient, meaning we're going to produce to sell for ourselves or to sell locally, because that market up there, it goes back and forth. We don't know what's going to happen. So it has created a very interesting movement in the governments to see inside that they need to take care of their own people. And I remember many times when many candidates have run for presidency, my #1 question was always, who's going to take care of your Latin American affairs? Because that who takes care of Latin American affairs is going to help us not having people migrate from their countries, because nobody wants to leave their country. But nobody had the right answer for many years, and I'll say it again, for good or for bad, Mr. Trump did what he did, and everybody said, whoops, maybe we should take care of our farmers now, because now our farmers are needing to develop for our own market. And not only that, but let's see how do we, around our neighborhoods, like in Nicaragua, for example, which it has its own problems, but the farmers are now starting to produce more for themselves and for their regional areas, which in the past, the only thing they were doing is producing to sell to USA or to Europe. And guess what? The nutritional level of those countries were down. So now, even quinoa, for example, quinoa in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia is now being fed to the school districts of poor areas, which in the past, the only thing they were looking is to produce quinoa to ship overseas. And they looked and thought, well, we need to sell this somewhere. Well, guess what? They're feeding their own countries, our own countries better. So sometimes shakes are good. Sometimes shakes are good.
Thank you. Thank you all for your discussion and your questions. We've got to stop now so Secretary Vilsack can take the floor. Yes. So thank you again for your participation. And thank you all panelists for your participation as well, and Paula for your help in planning the panel. So
thank you.
Take care.